Greetings, Spooky fans! Michael here, and it's time for another installment of my Pokemon Types Then vs. Now series, where I go over the history of a particular Pokemon type and how it's changed over the course of all the main series Pokemon games. I've done this twice before with the Bug type and the Dragon type, but today I'll be focusing on the Steel type, a type that has changed a lot more than I think people realize. So that covers all the intro stuff, so don't forget to subscribe to my channel since less than half of my viewers are subscribed, and let's dive into the Steel type, then versus now. First, we'll start with Generation 1, and the Steel type did not exist. Magnemite and Magneton are the only two Steel type Pokemon from the original 151, excluding later generation regional variants. However, at the time of their introduction, they were not Steel types. They were pure electric types in Generation 1, Red, Blue, and Yellow. So clearly not much to say for Gen 1. However, Gen 2 is when the Steel type was created, and that is now the interesting part of the video because that's what we're talking about. The Steel type was created to help balance out the extremely overpowered Psychic type that just decimated anything in its path in Generation 1. To give you an idea of how overpowered the Psychic type was, the two new Gen 2 types, Dark and Steel, both help balance out the Psychic type. It needed two new types to be stopped. However, according to Bulbapedia, the Steel type was also created to help nerf normal types. Normal types like Tauros and Persian were surprisingly really freaking good in Gen 1, thanks to their speed causing them to have high critical hit chances, plus the fact that their normal type moves were only stopped by rock types and ghost types. Although, might I say that I think they went a bit far with nerfing the normal type because Tauros and Persian, no one uses those anymore. So Steel type was added to help nerf Psychic and normal types, but those were far from the only types that it walled. The mantra of the Steel type was, "The best defense is a good defense." This was the Steel type's matchup chart at the time of its introduction in Generation 2. And as you can see, nothing touched it. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but its defensive type matchups are unrivaled. It took neutral damage from water and electric, was weak to fire, fighting, and ground, was immune to poison, and then resisted literally everything else. That means the Steel type took decreased or no damage from 12 of the 17 types. That's over 70%. To give you an idea of how insane that is, the second place type for the most amount of resistances and immunities is the Fire type. It has 6 now, and at the time it had 5, which is less than half of what the freaking Steel type had. It's just 12 is insane. Another important thing to note about this type matchup chart is that Steel is the only type in the game at the time to resist Dragon. That made it basically a staple of all competitive teams for many generations to come. Steel was clearly meant to be a type that excelled at being an unbreakable defensive tank, which is, I guess, why its offense wasn't that good. On the offensive side of things, all Steel moves were physical at the time. As for type matchups, it was only strong against Rock and Ice, two types that already had at least 3 weaknesses. Additionally, the only Steel moves were underwhelming. Metal Claw and Steel Wing were underwhelming in the power department and weren't even 100% accurate, and then Iron Tail was a truly egregious failure. Iron Tail is 100 base power, which is pretty good, but it's only 75% accurate? Are you kidding me? Hydro Pump and Fire Blast are stronger and more accurate. Iron Tail being only 75% accurate is as if it's 50% accurate, which I guess would be the same as the other ones. Shut up. The fully evolved Steel type Pokemon were Magneton, thanks to it gaining the type within this generation, plus Forretress, Steelix, Scizor, and Skarmory. Due to 2 of these Pokemon being new evolutions of Gen 1 Pokemon, the overall base stat average for these Pokemon was pretty high, coming in at a respectable 481. Most of their points were invested in defense though, which is unsurprising. Their average base defense stat was an astounding 135. Generation 2 had 1 Steel type specialist, Jasmine, and she mainly used Magnemites and a Steelix, which I honestly think it's a little weird. Would like to see her use some more of the Johto steel types, like a Skarmory or something. So the status of steel types in Gen 2 was that they excelled in the defensive department, but were a bit lackluster on the offensive side of things. Then came Gen 3, and Gen 3 didn't do much for most steel type Pokemon, but it added in two that excelled to great degrees: Metagross and Jirachi. Metagross was one of Generation 3's two pseudo-legendary Pokemon, which are Pokemon that have a 600 base stat total and 3 evolutionary stages. They tend to be slow to level up and evolve late, but end up being very powerful. Every generation has introduced one pseudo-legend except for Gen 3, which introduced two: Metagross and Salamence. Metagross, though, was actually the last pseudo-legendary introduced that was not Dragon type, the only other one being Tyranitar a generation earlier. If I might add, that's kind of disappointing. I'd like to see more pseudo-legends that are not Dragon types. But anyways, Metagross was very powerful by nature of being a pseudo-legend. While it was somewhat slow, it had phenomenal physical attack and defense and decently good stats elsewhere. Additionally, its secondary psychic typing meant that it only had 2 weaknesses: fire and ground. Jirachi had the same typing and therefore also appreciated only having 2 weaknesses. It also had the same base stat total of 600, nicely spread evenly across its stats, adding a lot to its versatility. Both of them also got new steel-type attacks. Metagross got Meteor Mash. Back then it was 100 base power and 85% accurate with a chance to raise the user's attack, so it was basically a cross between Metal Claw and Iron Tail. Jirachi got Doom Desire, which is steel-type Future Sight but stronger, being 120 base power back then and 140 now. Both of these moves were not very helpful for the steel type as a whole though. Doom Desire was Jirachi's signature move, so no one else got it. Plus, it didn't even deal steel type damage until Gen 5, it just did neutral damage in Gen 3 and Gen 4, which is wild. And then Meteor Mash, a good move but still could be better, wasn't even available to other steel type Pokemon. Metagross got it, and then the only other fully evolved Pokemon that got it at the time was Clefable. The other steel type moves added were Iron Defense, a pretty unnecessary move for most steel types since they already have great defense, and Metal Sound, which harshly drops the target's special defense, something steel types didn't care much about at the time since all steel moves were physical back then. The new steel types added were Metagross and Jirachi, as I already covered, plus Aggron, Mawile, and Registeel. The addition of 2 legends, a pseudo-legend, and Aggron really drove up the base stat total average for the type. Metagross and Jirachi were the ones that excelled, while all the others were at the very least okay, except Mawile. Mawile has bad stats and also didn't even get a steel type attack at the time. Mawile was useless. Emphasis on was, foreshadowing. The steel specialist of Gen 3 was the Hoenn champion Steven, although his team only actually had 3 steel types. So like, come on Steven. 2 last things to note about the steel type before we move on from Generation 3. The first is that they, back then and to this day, do not take any damage from the sandstorm weather condition. They are alongside rock and ground types in that regard. The second is that starting in Gen 3, steel types cannot be poisoned at all. Now this may be confusing because it was immune to poison in Generation 2, so how could it have been poisoned in Gen 2? Well, the answer is Twin Needle, a move that has a chance to poison despite being a bug type move. Steel types could still be poisoned by Twin Needle in Gen 2, but starting in Gen 3, they can no longer be poisoned by the move. And they can't be poisoned by anything up until Generation 7, when the corrosion ability is added. Then came Generation 4, a generation that gave a lot of types that didn't have good moves, and Steel was one of them. A plethora of Steel type moves were added. Bullet Punch for priority, Flash Cannon for special attackers, Gyro Ball for the slowest ones, Iron Head for reliable physical steel damage, Magnet Bomb to never miss, and then Metal Burst for an alternative to counter, and Mirror Coat and Mirror Shot for a precursor to Flash Cannon. Yeah, we usually don't care that much about the last 2. Lots of Steel-type Pokemon were added. Empoleon, Bastiodon, Trash Cloak Wormadam, Bronzong, Lucario, Magnezone, Probopass, Dialga, and Heatran. Most of these brought the average base stat total for the Steel types up even higher than it already was. Plus, thanks to the physical special split, a lot of these special attacking Steel types could find success using Flash Cannon. I would say Generation 4 is when the Steel type really started to thrive. Before, it was excellent on defense, but wasn't that great on offense. But now, thanks to all the new moves it has, it could fire back with some good, strong Steel stab moves. Additionally, the Dragon type was just continuing to get better and better, and since, like I mentioned earlier, Steel was the only type to resist Dragon moves, it became a necessary part of basically every competitive team. That's actually one of the multiple reasons that Garchomp was in the Ubers tier of the Smogon competitive metagame back in Gen 4. Yes, Steel types resisted its Dragon moves, but then it had Ground Stab Earthquake that could decimate Steel types. So like, you couldn't stop the freaking thing because it would just outspeed and kill you. The Gen 4 Steel type specialist was Byron, the gym leader in Canalave City. Not much to say here, he's cool, I guess. Then came Generation 5, which did not add much in the move department, but it added quite a few new Steel type Pokemon that ended up being really good. The moves added were Autotomize, Gear Grind, Heavy Slam, and Shift Gear. The gear moves were just for Klinklang at the time, and while Autotomize was widely learnable, I am not aware of it finding much use competitively. Heavy Slam was more useful though, a great move for many Steel types since Steel type Pokemon tended to be pretty heavy. The new Steel type Pokemon were Excadrill, Escavalier, Ferrothorn, Klinklang, Bisharp, Durant, Cobalion, and Genesect. Many of these would become, and still are, potent competitive threats, most notably Excadrill, Ferrothorn, and Bisharp, plus Escavalier, Durant, and Cobalion to a lesser yet still notable degree. The Steel specialist for Gen 5 was Colress in Black 2 and White 2. Not a gym leader or Elite 4 member, but he does still exist. Then came Generation 6, which was a really weird generation because the Steel type got some nerfs, but it also got quite a few buffs. It's kind of complicated. Let's walk through it. This became the new type chart for the Steel type and is the one still in place today. The addition of the Fairy type was great for the Steel type as it gave it both a new resistance and a new type it was strong against. However, at the same time, it lost its resistances to Dark and Ghost. Now, most Steel types weren't too bothered by that change. It made it so they had a net loss of 1 resistance, since they gained the Fairy resistance and lost the Dark and Ghost ones. However, for the Steel Psychic type Pokemon, Metagross, Jirachi, and Bronzong, this was deeply unfortunate, because it took them from having just 2 weaknesses, only 1 in the case of Levitate Bronzong, to having 4. So, yeah, they didn't like that. So for the type chart, it was a bit of give and take. I think a bit more give than take. But as for the roster of new Pokemon, it was ridiculous. Only 2 totally new species were added, Aegislash and Klefki. Klefki was all right, but Aegislash was flat out broken thanks to its form-changing capabilities, allowing it to take hits with excellent defenses and dish out hits with excellent offense. It mainly accomplished this by using its signature move, the only new Steel move in Gen 6, King's Shield. It functioned like Protect, but only for damaging moves. If the incoming attack made contact, it dropped their attack by 2 stages, which is brutal. But then the next turn, since Aegislash was so slow, it would still be in its Shields form and be able to take a hit with its excellent defenses. Then it could switch to its Blade form and hit back with excellent offenses. Then at the start of the next turn, it would just use King's Shield again, which had priority to get it back into its Shield form. It was basically like you had a Pokemon with 150 base defenses and 150 base offenses. It was so incredibly good that it got banned to the Ubers tier despite not being a legendary and not being a mega. Speaking of megas, dear God, the steel type ones were nasty. The steel type megas added in were Mega Scizor, Mega Mawile, Mega Aggron, Mega Lucario, Mega Steelix, and Mega Metagross. Some of them were simply just quite good, but Mega Mawile with its huge power and fantastic typing of Fairy Steel, Mega Lucario with its adaptability and insane stats, and Mega Metagross with Clear Body and its insane stats were just absurdly overpowered. 3 of the new Gen 6 Steel types ended up in Smogon's Uber tier: Aegislash, Mega Mawile, and Mega Lucario. Mega Metagross was not put into the Ubers tier, but it was banned in other competitive formats. Prior to Gen 6, the Steel type was important because it was one of the only counters to the best type in the game, Dragon. Now, from Gen 6 onward, the Steel type was important because it was one of the only counters to the best type in the game, Fairy. I think if you're not using a Steel type on your competitive team, you're doing something wrong. Oh, by the way, the Gen 6 Steel type specialist was Wigstrom, the weird knight guy with the star on his head. Call us Elite Four. He's fine. Next up is Generation 7. There were no changes to the type chart, but it added quite a lot of Steel type Pokemon. Alolan Sandslash, Alolan Dugtrio, Togedemaru, Solgaleo, Celesteela, Kartana, Duskmane Necrozma, Magearna, Stakataka, and Melmetal. Most of these are legendary or mythical in some capacity, but Celesteela and Kartana had the widest impact on the competitive scene as a whole. Beast Boost is just such a good ability. Also, I should make note of Dhelmise, which is an honorary Steel-type Pokemon. It's Grass and Ghost defensively, but thanks to its ability Steel Worker, it gets a stab boost for its Steel-type moves. As for the new moves, none of them really made a widespread impact on the competitive scene, because most of them were signature moves or Z moves. Anchor Shot was Dhelmise's signature move. Corkscrew Crash was the main Z move. Double Iron Bash was Melmetal's move. Gear Up is only learned by Klinklang and Magearna and is far too situational to ever be used. Searing Sunray Smash was Solgaleo's Z move, and Sunsteel Strike was its regular signature move. The only widespread move was Smart Strike, which was the same as Magnet Bomb, but stronger and learned by a lot more Pokemon. Overall, the Steel type didn't change much in Gen 7. It just got a couple good new Pokemon. And a lot of banned legends. The Steel type specialist was Mullane, who was just kind of a side character in Sun and Moon, but was an Elite Four member in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Finally, we reached Generation 8, the present day. The Steel type had a couple useful new Pokemon added, but overall, not a whole lot changed. The new Steel types are Corviknight, Berserker, Galarian Stunfisk, Capparaja, Duraludon, and the crowned forms of Zacian and Zamazenta. The legendaries are, of course, broken, but Corviknight and Duraludon have had the biggest impact on the competitive scene, at least from what I've seen. They also added some Steel-type Gigantamax forms: Melmetal, Corviknight, Capparaja, and Duraludon. Most of the new moves added are max moves. The primary Steel max move, Max Steel Spike, is a pretty solid move used for bolstering physical defenses. Melmetal's G-Max Meltdown is not available at the time of writing this video, but I don't anticipate it being widespread due to Melmetal's mythical status. Then G-Max Steel Surge for G-Max Capparaja makes Steel-type Stealth Rocks, which is unique, but I don't believe widely used. Behemoth Blade and Bash are the legend moves, which leaves Steel Beam and Steel Roller. Steel Beam is very powerful, but seriously harms the user, so I don't think really any Pokemon use it. Steel Roller is an Isle of Armor move used for removing terrain, but it's only usable if there is terrain to remove. I believe it gets some use in the VGC competitive scene, but I don't think it gets a whole lot of use. And finally, the Gen 8 Steel-type specialists are the brothers Chairman Rose and Peony. So in the end, the Steel type went from being non-existent to quite good defensively, but not very good offensively, to now being what I would consider one of the top 3 types in the game, alongside Fairy and Dragon. Thanks so much for watching, and an extra special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon, who are helping support my channel independent of fluctuating YouTube ad rates. If you want to help support me in the same way, the link is in the description below. Also, if you want to check out some more of my fun Pokemon content, I recommend these videos here. All right, that's all I have for now. So until next time, big fans. Gotta catch them all.